Welcome back to the Chip Lunch Podcast. We are back with another guest-hosted podcast episode with Manda.
Hello.
Hi, Manda. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
I see that you have a different jacket on. If everyone knows we're recording on the same day, you put a jacket on, I put a different jumper on, just so we went...
Costume change.
Yeah,
That's
costume
good
change.
form.
Yes.
That's right.
I've also added a blanket.
Oh, have you?
Yes.
Oh,
It's freezing.
the last one was too cold. It gets
First day
so
of spring
cold.
and it's freezing.
It gets so cold in this corner of the church.
Mm.
Coldest corner of the church. Any church.
Coldest corner of the church.
Triple C.
Mm.
Alliteration.
Anyway, the real reason that
I
we're
like
both
alliteration.
here.
Oh, do you?
Yes,
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
Oh. Have you got a favourite one? I'd put you on the spot.
Dad and Dave. Dad and Dave's, I can't remember what it was. Like tree service or something.
Isn't that Bill and Ben? Is
No,
Bill and Ben the tree man?
There's one from Harry Potter that I can't remember the character, but she's got a Scottish accent. She says he has a particular proclivity for pyrotechnics.
Oh.
It's whoever, Miss McGonagall, something like that.
Professor McGonagall.
Professor McGonagall.
Mm.
Yeah.
I was like, Joel and I should know who this is.
Well, it's not in the book.
So he
That's
has a
why I know.
particular
It's in the movie.
proclivity for pyrotechnics. There
Oh,
we go.
nice.
Yeah, he likes fire, basically.
Is that how you describe yourself?
No.
This is Lee, by the way.
Hi. Yeah.
I
I'm Lee.
don't think we've introduced you. Lee is on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's really good to have you. I confused you when I first met you. I confused you for Scottish.
Okay.
But
Yeah, lots
are-
of people make that mistake.
You're not Scottish, are you?
I am not Scottish. I'm from Northern Ireland, which is the northeast of the island of Ireland. Of the island of Ireland.
Yes.
And we can see Scotland on a good day,
Mm-hmm.
which is about once a year.
And you can actually see Scotland from there.
Oh yeah, 100%. You
Really?
can see Isle of Skye and Isle of Islay as well, and Campbelltown, I think, something like that.
You can see Campbelltown in Sydney.
From Northern
You
Ireland.
can just see a big mullet. That's all you can see. No, that's probably a joke from about 20 years ago about Campbelltown, isn't it? Now the mullets are all in Cronulla.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. They are, aren't they?
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
son hasn't taken up the mullet bandwagon, though, I've noticed.
No, but he does inform me that at his school, even girls have mullets. So,
Really?
Yeah. So
It's made its way into
Cronulla's
to girls.
the new Campbelltown. Yeah.
That
Really?
is
Wow.
deeply concerning.
What do you reckon, Manda, with a mullet?
You know what? There was a period of time where I really wanted to shave the side of my head.
Yeah.
When was that?
I don't know, 10 years ago probably.
That works okay. Go a mullet and a little rat's tail at the back. They're always awesome.
I probably would have done it if not for what do you do for the next period
It's
of
gotta grow
time
back.
while it's growing.
Mm,
Yeah.
Mm.
Wow.
Mm.
I don't know if you'd go through with that. Would you really do that?
Joel, don't try and stitch me up to prove a point.
100%, that's what I'll do. And I'll put it on the podcast
Oh, I
and I'll
don't-
put it out on the internet.
I
and
don't
make
think you'd do that.
I don't think you would.
I would.
Would you?
Yes, but I'm saying I don't want to.
I feel
So don't
feel like-
make me
feel
just to
like
prove a point.
She came on the last podcast, Lee, and she has beef with her husband about
Yeah.
what the proposal story was.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to create more beef about it. Oh, I should stop talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can tell when Amanda's upset with me.
No, I just don't
There
like
should always
it's not
be a
about me, it's about
discrepancy in
Lee.
proposal
We're
stories.
here for Lee, not
We're here
me.
for Lee. Here for Lee, not me.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good.
Feels
Speaking of
special.
which, first question that we
Yes.
ask everyone is, how do you like to have your... Now, from where you're originally from, you probably call it just chips, but
Yeah.
we call it hot chips.
Yeah.
How do you like to have them?
Made with Irish potatoes, particularly Morris Piper potatoes.
Wow, even
which
down to
is
the
a certain
potato type.
Hand cut, blanched, and then fried, and preferably from the chip shop that my mum worked in when I was growing up as a teenager.
Wow.
Who made the best chips ever. So yeah,
Really?
yeah. So that's quite complicated. Yeah.
Oh, no, I
Very
like it though.
So don't
Specific.
invite me to your house for chips. Yeah.
I really like the specificity of that. Do you have any salt?
Oh yeah, 100%. Salt, vinegar.
Hang on.
But a little bit like Cathra had said on the podcast previously, it has to be proper, like malt vinegar, not Australian watered down vinegar,
Right.
which seems to happen in the chip shops here, but just hardcore pure stuff, no watering down.
And can you settle an argument for us? What type of salt?
What type of salt? I grew up just normal table salt. There weren't types of salt when I grew up, so I don't really care about the type of salt. I'm a bit privy to that flecky hipster kind of, probably
like
Celtic sea salt actually. Let's just go that one. Yeah.
That's not
Everything
bad.
Celtic's
Yeah.
better.
See, I didn't hear you. I heard that not once did he mention chicken salt, Manda.
Definitely no
And
chicken
you
salt.
You were banking. I think you're now inviting guests on the podcast who you think might have plain salt.
No,
Is this just a vendetta against you?
It's not against just Manda. It's against anyone who eats chicken salt.
I used to kind of like chicken salt, but it just takes away from the flavour of the chips, I reckon. It's good on some things. We
Well,
once
I
made our own
imagine if
chicken
you were
salt.
having Irish hand-cut
Morris Pipers.
blanched.
Morris
did you say
Pipers.
blanched?
You gotta blanch them first.
before,
Blanched and then fried
Yeah.
chips. You'd probably want to taste them. You know?
Yeah, that's right. And they're nice and thick as well, which is good.
If your mum was making them in the chip shop, is she blanching them as well? Are they hand cut in the chip shop?
They peeled them, they hand cut them, they blanched them all beforehand, and then they pumped out, like, the amount of potatoes that they used was a lot.
Wow.
It was Ireland, and
I love the way you say Ireland.
in
It
the
sounds so
90s, so
Ireland.
people weren't that healthy either. So it was like lots of chips.
Wow, that sounds awesome. Where are you from? Oh, maybe let's ask the original question. Do we have any sub questions for question one, Manda?
Well, kind of.
Go.
Only because I have some inside knowledge that Lee recently returned to Ireland.
Oh,
Yes.
And I was wondering if you had chips while you were there.
Oh.
And if you didn't, I'll be very disappointed.
I actually don't think I did have any chips when I was there. No.
Oh.
I don't know why. I was only there for about 10 days, something like that. So it was just zipping back and forward. I didn't have any hot chips. No,
That's
it's
disappointing.
disappointing. It is.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is that chip shop still there?
The chip shop is maybe still there, but I haven't been
You
to
didn't
it.
go to
for-
that
haven't been
place.
to it for
Yeah.
years.
Is it called a
Yeah.
chippy?
It's called a chippy.
You call
Yeah,
it chippy there, don't they?
Yeah, same as in England as
Yeah.
well, like just a chippy or a chip shop.
Go down the local
Yeah.
chippy.
Chippy.
But the thing that's probably a little bit more Irish is you don't ask for chips, you just ask for a chip, right?
Oh.
So if you go in the shop and you say, "Hey, can I have a chip?" that means lots of chips, like a portion of chips. But we just say, "Give us a chip," and if you have chips along with something else, then it's called a supper. So like if you had chips with sausages, it's called a sausage supper. And that basically means give me sausages and chips.
Wow.
Yeah.
What if, but are there no sizes of chips? You just get a
Yeah,
portion?
you'd probably get like medium and large, that kind of thing.
So
but
you'd
you always
say,
get a
can I
decent
have
portion.
a medium chip?
A medium chip? You could say that. Yeah, give us a medium chip. Give us a
Really?
small chip.
Oh.
Yeah.
Just a small
and,
one.
And you just got one. No. So.
That's what it sounds. That's what
It
I'm
is, isn't it?
imagining.
Yeah. We're weird with grammar in Ireland. We're not always correct with things. Yeah. Often not.
That's really
I like
interesting.
that.
Yeah.
Next question. Ready to move on?
Yeah.
Go on. You do the next question. Go on. You do it. Lee Murray.
This is your life.
It is a bit like that.
It is a bit like that.
Yeah.
How
Mm.
did you become a Christian?
Yeah, I grew up in a country where pretty much everyone would have been to church. There was a lot of nominal Christianity in that most people would have said they believed in God or in a God, Jesus, heaven and hell, and all that stuff. Even if they didn't go to church, most of the schools, in fact, all of the schools would have had Christian assemblies. So the public schools. You would have either had a Protestant school or a Catholic school, and both of those would have invited the respective ministers in. So pretty much everybody when I grew up heard the gospel. And my mum, when she was younger, professed a faith, and I went along to church, went along to Sunday school. So I always believed as well that in those things. But when I hit around about 10, my mum actually got chucked out of a church.
Really?
Kind of. Not really, but what happened was my parents divorced when I was 3, And then when I was 10, my mum started dating this guy who professed to be a Christian, got pregnant with my second sister, and at that point they basically just called her a harlot and said, see you later. And it was at the time where she probably needed them most. And so that actually really set a trajectory for me in my teenage years, and in a couple of different things. So one, I just thought that Christians were hypocrites and moral fun police. Two, I was kind of just set on this story of my teenage years being like the fixer of my family. So I'm the eldest of 5. I've got another 2 siblings, Curtis and Paige. And Paige is kind of like they're still in their 20s and whatever as well. And basically from that moment on, a lot of my teenage years were kind of like chasing after my father, who often wasn't around when he was there, trying to fix things in the home. And then I grew up in a context where there was civil war. So death was always actually really quite front and center, and the possibility of dying. So I had also this fear of death. And God brought all 3 of those things to a head probably around about the age of 17 or a little bit before that, where I was wrestling with the fact that I was getting older. I was looking after my siblings. I was trying to kind of protect my mom and fix things in the home. At the same time, I actually had aspects of my own life that were just a complete mess, and I needed fixing. So I was taking drugs. I was just kind of doing what most other teenagers in the area that I grew up were doing to escape. I suppose to escape many things, and that's what was modeled to us as well. But then also too, when I was 15, just like a little bit before that, the girl who I was dating, Amanda, became pregnant, and I became a father at the age of like 16, but didn't have an opportunity to engage in my child's life, Matthew, and all of that was just swirling around for me. At the same time that lots of things got pretty crazy in Northern Ireland in terms of what we call the Troubles, which is effectively civil war where people were getting killed. And I found myself in a pub up in Belfast around about that age, where masked men came bursting in with machine guns. I thought I was gone. I thought I was dead at that point. I found myself a week later at another spot where what started out as a peaceful protest ended up in a massive siege, where people brought guns and the police were firing plastic bullets and whatever. I nearly get hit in the back of the head, nearly get hit in the knee. And then to work out how to deal with it all, I went out the week later and with some of my mates, and we took drugs and whatever, and I felt like I was going to die. And that just all weighed on me. I had this massive fear of death. I had my life that needed to be fixed. I was looking at my family and going, man, I don't know what to do here. And then I had my father not being around, but also at the same time going, well, I'm not around and I can't be around to be the father of my child. That just wasn't an option back then. And then the week later, I ended up going to a funeral for a great uncle of mine who I didn't know, but all of this fear of death stuff meant that was the scariest thing that I could have done at that moment. And I walked into this small Irish cottage, like it literally had a thatched roof, 2 rooms, packed full of people, like all of these old Irishmen with tweed jackets stinking of cigarette and whiskey. And it was just packed full, and there was this coffin open right in the middle of the floor. And I'm like, man, wow. And I thought that would have been the scariest thing that would have happened that day, but it wasn't until the Presbyterian minister kind of came floating in to the middle. That was actually the scariest thing, and it wasn't because he was Presbyterian. It was because he read, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And straight away I was going, you Coolio, Gangster's Paradise. This guy's awesome. And yeah, I mean, if you're younger than kind of like 35, you're not going to get that joke, right? But but that, because that's what I did with stuff. I made a joke about it. I tried to minimize the discomfort of all these three things.
Yep.
And then it was just like that. It was like God hit me over the back of the head, and I knew that I could not say, if I walked through the valley of the shadow of death, that the good shepherd Jesus was with me. I couldn't have said it like that back then, of course, but that's what I knew. So I went out that night, I got hammered and high, and I decided at 3 a.m. that I was going to go to church in the morning. And I stood up at a party and I said, in the morning, I'm going to church. And everybody laughed and just thought I was being like an idiot. But the girlfriend that I had at the time was forced to go to church every week by really beautiful Christian parents. So force sounds a little bit too harsh, but she was made to go to church every week. She didn't really want to go. And I said to her, I'm going to church with you in the morning. Basically, went to church, walked into this building. There's like 1,000 people. All of the guys are wearing 3-piece suits. The women are mostly wearing dresses and hats. And I rock up in my ripped jeans t-shirt, still stinking of alcohol from the night before. And I sat there and I felt so uncomfortable. I didn't know how to open the Bible, didn't know any of the songs, but I heard that day what must have been the gospel, because I went away going, I know exactly what I need to do, and I felt like I was the only person in the room. Following that, I started reading my Bible. I stopped taking drugs. There was, not that you need to do those things before to be able to become a Christian, but it started changing. And basically from that was September 1997, and then I became a Christian finally in April 1998, or March 1998, just before I turned 18. And I got to the point where I knew what I needed to do, and I just didn't have the courage to ask my girlfriend Gillian at the time to take me to church. And she asked, I just remember praying and saying, hey, God, if you want me to go to church, you'll make it pretty obvious. You know, make somebody ask me. And Gillian came to me one day and said, I want to ask you something, but I've decided not to because you'll probably say no. And I was like, I knew at that moment what it was. I'm like, just ask me. Like, I couldn't say, I want to go to church with you. She finally asked me. I went to church the next day and I became a Christian 4 days later. Than that. So that was March 1998, if I'm going to say that in Australia. Yeah. And probably probably just to wrap that up, I think the key motivation for me there was like that fear of death that really pushed me towards that. And one of the liberating things when I became a Christian was that fear just went away. Now it's come back at different points over time, but it went away because I now knew that I trusted in the Good Shepherd who would walk with me through that valley of the shadow of death. But the thing that was really surprising for me was that actually it also fixed the other two things. I realized that I had a Father in heaven who loved me and who knew me and who would never let me down and who would blow out of the water even the best dad in the world. And that was a huge surprise to me, and that completely liberated this constant chase that I was having to fulfill that and fill that myself. And then the whole fixer thing, I was like, wow, I'm like a sinner. I've got a lot of things in my life. And it was like Jesus going, you know, come to me, all you who are burdened and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And I just felt this rest that came, that all of the things that I had done, all of the ways that I had rejected God, all of the things that I had done to hurt people in the past was forgiven. Now, I still had to wrestle with that, but I was surprised. I thought it was just this fear of death, but actually the fixing of my life in making me more like Jesus, it freed me from feeling like I needed to fix everybody, and also that chasing after my Father thing as well. So it was so much more than just a get out of hell free card or how do you journey through death kind of thing. It actually, Jesus brings life, and that's what I found. And it was the best news I've ever heard. It still is. And so that's how I became a Christian.
Wow. Good start, Mena. You agree?
Pretty good start.
Not a bad start, eh?
Bad start.
It's actually not bad at all.
I'm still a little bit stuck on the machine guns.
Well, this is what was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
Can you please educate me? And this is going to be obviously difficult to do in less than 17 hours.
Yeah.
But can you educate me on the Troubles and what what if people don't know what it was about? What was it about? It was sectarianism.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I'll give a bullet point history as best I can. England and the Crown effectively attempted, or well, they had one attempted colonisation of Ireland that failed. Then they had another one where they effectively took over the whole of Ireland. And in the process of that, they actually persecuted a lot of the people who were considered the Celts, who would then become, I think this is right, a lot of them would have ended up largely Catholic. And during, just post the Protestant Reformation in England, a lot of the landlords and a lot of the Scottish people who were sent over, they were all Protestant. And that localised around the northeast of Northern Ireland in a particular province called Ulster. And that meant that you had a part of Ireland where there were basically these two communities that were growing and forming and developing. But in that there was lots of persecution, particularly of the Irish Catholics. So if you zoom way ahead, you know, like you've got the mid 1800s, you've got the Irish potato famine. We couldn't have Morris Piper blanched chips. Basically, that's what that means. But lots of people died, and the English didn't really do anything about it. And lots of people then went to America. But the more wealthy people tended up in that area tended to be Protestant, and they did lots of things like they couldn't vote, all of that kind of stuff. And in the early 1900s, 1916, there was a rebellion that happened in Dublin where a whole bunch of Irish Catholics basically rebelled against the Crown, and in 1924 they gained independence from the British. But part of that agreement was that this part in the northeast of Ireland would stay under British rule, and all the rest of it would be free, and they eventually become a republic. Anyway, that was a concession. So basically from then, there was always this idea that what was needed by Irish Catholics or nationalists was to get Britain out of all of Ireland, that Ireland belongs to the Irish. And that was really the precursor for the Trouble. And then in 1960-something, late in the 60s, there was a lot of the civil rights movement that happened in America, like all over the world. I don't know if you're familiar with U2, Sunday Bloody Sunday song.
Yep.
That was written about an event that probably was the biggest single thing that catapulted our country into a civil war, where basically the Catholics couldn't vote. They redrew the voting lines. They said you have to own a house and you have like one vote per household. And some Catholics were living in that area, 4 or 5 families in a household. Many of them didn't own, so they were coming out in number, and it resulted in this massacre that then just meant there was a tit for tat killings, bombings, and whatever between these two sides, which we call Protestant and Catholic, but it's not really to do with religion. It's more to do with whether you were born in the Shire or out of the Shire. Which we've kind of seen a little bit of what that looks like here, haven't we? But just imagine that on steroids and happening a lot for 30 years.
Yeah. I mean, is it the bombing in Brighton or something or the G8 meeting or something like that, where I can't remember but it was something like that. Anyway, obviously revealing my ignorance, but that was a really good.
Yeah,
that was a really good history lesson.
There've been so many. You know what I mean? Look, if you want to dig into it more, watch The Crown on Netflix. There's a few interactions later on in that, in terms of how it impacted England particularly. But it basically meant that we lived very, very separate lives. Like I grew up in a very Protestant part of Northern Ireland. We didn't know Irish. We didn't know. We none of us had Irish names or anything like that, and we wanted to be part of the UK, and then there were other parts that you would go to where that was the very opposite. So there was just constantly tension all the time.
Constant tension, yeah, that makes sense.
I think that gives a lot of context to what your life was like growing up.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that fear of death and being in your face.
100%, 100%, and you normalize it. The thing is, part of the coping mechanism is normalizing it. So it's actually been a number of years on now where a lot of this stuff has been hitting me again, where I've been going, actually, that wasn't normal. It was not normal to have a few times in a year where you have a bomb scare at your school. Or, you know, like I can remember as a student living in an area, I was going between one hospital to the next. I trained to be a nurse, and I was basically running from one to the next to do a moonlight shift, and I got tackled to the ground by a soldier on my street. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, there's a bomb, just don't go up there. And there was a bomb right outside my student house. They were about to blow up a doctor and a couple of student nurses, but it was all a big mistake. You know, so things like that, I can kind of say like this, I can joke about it, I can kind of speak about it as though it's normal, but it's actually not normal. So there was just that profound sense, I think, for everyone that life is pretty fleeting in many ways.
So you're trying to live your normal life, like going to work like you were then, but it's just this constant tension and anxiety of something may happen.
Yes and no. Like as in you yes, and there were moments where it was more like that, but largely it just all felt normal. You weren't walking around scared for your life. Yeah. You just did what you did. That's right. It probably wasn't until I moved to Australia for like in 2005, I can remember running along the Esplanade, and every time somebody would come running up behind me, I'm like, I'm ready for a fight, you know, like because and I started to realize actually all of these things are abnormal, but you're not thinking about it at the time. And in fact, I was probably a bit more caught up in some of the stuff as well before I'd become a Christian, because that was where I grew up.
You're growing up in it. That's what causes
that was your experience.
Yeah, that's right.
And you talked about when you became a Christian around 17 or 18. That like a lot of things changed for you, although you mentioned those three big things. How did that play out after that then? Like what did it look like for you? Like did you go and train to be a nurse pretty much after that?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because I grew up in a housing commission area in Northern Ireland. I went to what was considered a secondary school. So basically smart people went to a grammar school. I went to a secondary school. I probably could have went to grammar school, but I chose to go there just to kind of say I'm a little bit smart.
I could have, but I didn't want to.
I could have. I actually chose not to. It was probably a dumb mistake, but anyway. And
was there pressure not to?
Sorry?
Was there pressure not to go to grammar school? Yeah, 100%. That's what I was going to ask
100%. You'd be a snob, you'd be, like all of that kind of stuff. But basically at school you're told join the army or go to work in a factory. And I, I was like, no, I want to do this. And I applied for university and whatever, but give me that original question again.
Oh, what after you? So you became a Christian.
How soon after you became a Christian did that happen?
Yeah. So pretty soon after that. So what happened immediately was I told people that I'd become a Christian, and they all laughed at me. They were like, "Yeah, right, not Lee Murray. Like you can't become a Christian," which shows you kind of what a lot of people thought. A lot of people thought you needed to be good enough to come to God. Not that actually God transforms you from the inside out and changes everything. But they laughed at me, and they laughed at me for weeks, in fact, until they realized one day, hang on a minute, it's been like 3 months has passed, and every time we ask what happened at the weekend, Lee says he went to church rather than out clubbing or whatever it was. There must be something in this. But I just felt this profound sense that, like, if this is true, it's true for absolutely everybody in the world. You know what I mean? Like the claims of Christianity that God made absolutely everything and everyone, they were made, for Jesus, by Jesus, then it's either true for everybody or it's not. It's either true for everybody that we're lost outside of Jesus or it's not, and I just went, man, I need to tell everybody about this. And I was probably a real jerk when I was doing it. I tried to kind of tie everything in, like drinking coffee into a Jesus conversation. So that changed a lot for me, because people just thought I was weird at that point. But probably the biggest thing was I ended up then going to university, and that was a huge moment for me, because what I was saying was, I remember the conversation with my mom. I remember saying, "Hi, Mom, like I want to go to uni," which she loved and wanted me to do. I was the first person in my family to do that. But also what that meant was that I'd be moving away from home. And that was a huge decision, because at that stage, 3 of my siblings were really quite young, and I was like a father to them. And I remember saying, hey, Mum, I need to go, not because it's far away, but because I need to start working out what it's going to look like for me as an adult now. And that was massive. So I ended up going to uni in Belfast, which is the capital city of Northern Ireland, in September 1998 to do nursing. And that's when I probably started to just expand my horizons. I realised that actually things are a little bit bigger than my housing commission area. But also too, when I was 20, I started, I ended up going to India on a short-term mission trip. And that was probably one of the biggest things in that stage that shaped kind of who I am today. So we had like a 6-month discipleship program. Then we went to India. I'd never been outside of the UK. I'd never eaten Indian food. I'd never been in a hot country, nothing like that. And we went to India for 3 weeks. And God just blew me away in that moment, that actually it was just this very concrete example that there are millions of people who are lost outside of Jesus. And what we had were a bunch of Christians going, and they were trying to work out how to tell the gospel in a way that the people there would understand. We call it contextualization, but they were trying to contextualize the gospel. But they were really struggling to do it with people like me back in Northern Ireland. Effectively, they kind of championed mission overseas, but they didn't know how to do mission across the street. And that really, really shaped. So I came back from that going, man, we need to work out how to proclaim the gospel, and how to I didn't say the word proclaim back then because that would have been way too posh. Tell people about Jesus. Yeah, so that kind of shaped a lot of kind of where I am today as well in that moment.
And you said, like, first of all, you were going to secondary school was encouraged and going to grammar school was discouraged. So then you became the first person in your family to go to uni.
Yeah.
Your mum encouraged it, but what's the vibe around everything else? Oh, off he goes, you're going to leave us? It was a bit like that?
Yeah, I remember one of my cousins, George, if you're listening to this is, I love you, mate.
Hey, Georgie.
I remember George saying to me, mate, like, I'm earning £270 a week, and I'm 17 or like 18, and you're going to uni, and you're only going to earn that once you finish, you know, like, and so it was just stuff like that, which was fine. But because I moved as well, actually, what started happening was not that I want to abandon my friends from back at home, but I started creating new friendships and people who were in a similar stage and whatever to me, and actually one of the guys, James Gilpin, has been one of my longest standing best mates. I was his best man at his wedding, that kind of thing, and a lot of my life just started shaping around Belfast anyway, and being at university. And then at the age of 21, I was 20 at that point. At the age of 21, I ended up leading a short-term mission trip to Thailand, and was halfway to Australia at that point, and I had to take a year out of uni to do that. So I called my uncle up, who lives up in Engadine, and I said, hey, you're a Christian, I'm a Christian. We don't know each other, but can I come and visit you in Australia? So I ended up in Australia for a year. I lived here between 01 and 02, and I actually came to Solis in the factory years ago a few times.
Way.
Yeah. Like at the original factory?
At the original Solis, yeah. So I've even got history there.
Been there.
Yeah.
I went with a few people,
cool.
kind of probably partly because there were some girls involved at that point.
That's why I started.
But also too, I was kind of blown away by that and going, oh man, here's actually, because remember at 20, I'm going, how do we reach people across the street, not just across the seas? And things started to click for me. That was one of them. Another one when I was in Australia was just blokes reading the Bible with each other. Actually talking, you know, like my uncle would preach, and he wouldn't be that much different than what he was from when he was preaching to what he was in real life. And he'd finish preaching and he'd chuck on his Manchester United jersey, which was the worst thing ever. But it just showed me there was a bit more of a laid back, normal, how do we be Christians in everyday kind of life approach. Whereas in Northern Ireland, it was quite different to that.
Yeah, it sounds like there was, and it was like you got to earn it, like earn your salvation almost, and have rather than just like I've been transformed and I'm just living it out.
Yeah, you're saved by grace. And we often say, and I think this is actually a challenge for most Christians, we often say that we live by grace, but often the way that we live is like we need to pay God back, or how much we believe that God loves us depends on how many good and bad things we do in a week, you know, like, and that's actually not the gospel at all, but that was certainly a lot more prevalent in Northern Ireland. And I joke a little bit, there's more to it than this, but I was bought a Bible and a 3-piece suit when I became a Christian. That is true, and that was partly so that I fitted in, but there was a lot more to it than that. So
that you mentioned that trip to Thailand. Isn't that the first time, if I remember correctly from Catherine's episode, where you met her? Did you meet her once? No. You're remembering correctly that Thailand features in that story.
In the story, but that doesn't happen until after. So that happens whilst I'm in Australia. Catherine's in New Zealand, and then we both end up going back. So we both end up going back to the UK via Thailand, and and I met her in Thailand. Do you want to know more about that?
Sure. There's no point breaking up the flow.
I mean, I can't remember what Catherine said, but basically. Basically, we were on a beach, and there were these fighting Welsh girls who were arguing.
I don't remember this.
This is Catherine didn't say this is great.
And Catherine was kind of like with them, but not. It was just like this traveling relationship. And I was with a guy, a Welsh guy, believe it or not, called Tom Jones. And I kid you not, that's true. Yeah. People didn't throw things at him, you know, like he was.
That's the worst version of Tom Jones. Burning down the house.
That's why it's funny.
I reckon so. I agree. But anyway, I was with Tom Jones, the non-singing Tom Jones, and we kind of didn't really know each other anyway. But he knew the fighting Welsh girls, and started talking to them, and I was left to the side, and Catherine was kind of left to the side, and I don't like not talking to people. So I struck up a bit of a conversation, and I said to her, hey, do you want to go for a drink? And what I meant by that was, do you want to get away from this? Because this is not fun. And she just said, no, I've got a boyfriend. And I think that's because she had set herself up for what happens when you're traveling, is that basically people just want to get stuff from people. And anyway, I didn't really have that alternative motive, although I thought she was really quite cute and pretty. She finally agreed to go and have a drink with me, and then we ended up talking. We sat down on the beach. It was full moon in the sky, the water's floating in and out. We chatted all night, and then she leant over to kiss me and give me a kiss. No, that's not true, that bit. That's not true, that bit. I just like to throw that in there because it's fun. But yeah, we ended up hanging out then for about 5 days after that, and I just had this weird sense of, I'm going to see this person again. Like I'm going to see her again, and I reckon there was just something about that made a profound impact on me. I ended up going back home. Catherine ends up going back to England, and she starts to date another guy, and I'm like, oh well, okay. That was a bit gutting, and but you know, at the end of the day, it was 5 days we knew each other, and we were living in 2 different countries, so. No hard feelings, Catherine, it's okay. But what happened for me in that moment, so I was a Christian, and Catherine wasn't. Catherine had actually not really known anybody who she thought was probably a Christian, the way that she would define it now. But the whole process of me leaving Australia to go back to Northern Ireland was a massive shift for me. I actually didn't realise that probably for about a month before I was about to leave, I had a lot of anxiety. I didn't know that I had it, but probably a lot of anxiety about going back to Northern Ireland. I actually had, I'll add this in, part of that period of time before I became a Christian, I also had the Protestant equivalent of the IRA after me. So basically guys who would be the kind of guys that would yield guns and beat people up were after me for about 2.5 years. And
what's that called? What's that called?
They're called the UVF. That's one of the many Protestant equivalents.
A lot of them start with U because of this starts with Ulster.
That's right. Yeah. Ulster Volunteer Force is what they stood for.
They're volunteering.
Yeah. But anyway, the reason why that's important is I think actually I was really scared about going back to Northern Ireland because there was all of this stuff that I'd left behind that was really quite hard, and I didn't know how to process it back then. Yeah. I had this awesome experience. I felt like I belonged here. It was like, you know, I was always outside of the box where I grew up. You know, when I became a Christian, I felt like the black sheep of the family, which was weird. And that was partly because I just thought a bit differently to a lot of the people around me. Whereas here, I was like, this feels like I should have grown up in this area. Maybe God got it wrong. He doesn't, but that's what I joke about. And I reckon I was probably wobbled as a Christian for about a good month before I left, and for the whole period of time for a long time. So I didn't care when I met Cathra that she wasn't a Christian. In fact, I probably hadn't even considered how me now being a Christian would shape what happens with girls. I just didn't know. It hadn't, like, the gospel hadn't really kind of pushed into that area of my life before. I knew that it was wrong, but I didn't know why. I didn't really care. So anyway, I ended up back in Northern Ireland, had this massive reverse culture shock where I was like, I still don't really like Northern Irish Christians all that much, so didn't really go to church for a while. And my life actually spiraled for a little bit where some of the things that I really struggled with before I'd become a Christian came back. I couldn't really feel like I could speak to people about it because it's all about being good. And there would have been people who I could have spoke to about it, but my own sinful disposition, my pride, all of this stuff that was going on, I just kind of didn't know how to deal with it. So probably for about 8 months, 12 months, I wasn't regularly going to church. I was still a Christian, but it was like I was having an outer body experience. It was like I was watching myself go down this road that kind of led to death, led to unhappiness, led to like a lot of the stuff that used to bring me joy before. And I'm doing it as a Christian, and it's like, this is not life-giving at all. And I knew it, but I couldn't stop myself from doing it. At the same time, I had been chatting to Cathra on the phone fairly regularly, and I was going out with this girl at the time. I was going out with this other girl at the time, and that wasn't particularly healthy. And at the same time, this is when I first kind of found out about more fully about my son Matthew from his mum's cousin at a nightclub one night, and that really just affirmed for me, because I had actually started to believe things that were not true. In that period, is just as a way of dealing with it, that maybe he wasn't my child, all of that kind of stuff. And so this just hit me square between the eyes. And at that point, my girlfriend couldn't deal with that, and she just ran away. And at the same time, Cathra was on the other end of the phone, and she was the person who was there for me. And we kept on chatting and chatting and whatever. And I think we fell in love on the phone. And a year later, in April 2003, Cathra came over to visit me on my birthday, and there were a couple of Australians that I knew from here who were over visiting, and they came to visit me in Northern Ireland. One of the guys' name is Mark Nosworthy, or Nozza, from the Shire. His dad was Nozza. Yeah, his dad, he was the most Australian person that I knew at the time. And he picked her up from the airport, brought her back, and basically said, you guys should sit together for a photograph. And we sat together, and I put my arm around her, and then after the photograph was taken, we couldn't let go. And
that's when she leaned in for a kiss.
Yeah, it was always her initiated every time. So that was, well, actually, no, our first kiss.
Yes.
Is Catherine going to say this?
No,
is she going to worry? No. Everybody kind of knows this story that knows us. We were going to kiss once at one point, and just before I was about to lean in, a song came on, and it was "It's Now or Never, Give It to Me" from Elvis. And then we just burst out laughing, and we went, "Oh, that's just ruined the moment, hasn't it?" But yeah, so we then got together. Like we got together at that point. I very quickly moved over to England because I'd finished university, and I basically said, "Hey, I'll come over to England, but I want to go and live in Australia, so it's me and Australia. You get the package deal." But I moved over there for a little bit at first, and I think the key moment in my story then at that point was that I was saying to Catherine that I was a Christian, and she turned around one day and she said to me, "You say that you're a Christian, and you say that you love God more than me, but I just don't see it." And I was like, okay.
Wow.
And God really used that moment to speak to me and rebuke me, really. So I was like, right, okay, if I'm going to move over to England, the first thing that I need to do is find a good church. I ended up looking around in Hull. So Hull was voted Britain's crappiest city 7 years in a row, for all of the wrong reasons. So I just tell people that I went to Hull and back to declare my love for her. But it was also one of the least churched cities in England. So there was like 0.7% of people went to church, and most people that I knew were quite antagonistic against the gospel, which was actually really good. It opened up lots of conversations, but it meant that there were very few what we would call Bible teaching churches in the area. I remember looking for lots of churches and just going, oh man, I'm done. Like, I can't find a church anywhere. And I looked up, and there was a University Christian Union guy standing in the coffee shop, and I was like, oh, I think they know Bible teaching churches. And I went up and asked him about a church, and he said, yeah, there's an Anglican church up the road. And I just went, I am doomed. Like, I'm completely done for, because growing up in Ireland, no offence, by the way, for all of the Anglicans in the room. I studied at Moore College, so I'm allowed to say that. Yeah. But basically, Anglicanism for me was either synonymous with Catholicism or just completely liberal. But anyway, we went to this church, and it was awesome. It was so good. We were able to say, hey, here's where we're at. Here's where I'm at. This is what life looks for us at the moment. They loved us, welcomed us in. They said the hard things. They discipled us. Like, somebody walked with Cathra for a whole journey of her becoming a Christian, you know, and they were so loving, so deeply loving, without abandoning the truth for us. That was hugely impacting. And what happened was that, as Cathra was engaging more in church, and we were getting closer to this moment where she would finish uni, I'm getting more and more convicted about our relationship. And I went to a guy called Dave Lynch, who now is a good friend of ours down in Tassie, and he was doing the equivalent of MTS, like an apprenticeship there. And I said, hey Dave, I really feel like God's calling me to break it off with Cathra, and this is going to be the hardest thing that I will ever do, because it's like 99% perfect, but that 1% is a thread that kind of goes through absolutely everything. And even though she's been coming to church a lot, even though she's done Christianity Explored, I don't know when or if she will actually become a Christian. And I remember just going, man, I just felt sick to the stomach at the thought of that. And Cathra had no idea. So the next day we decided to drive to IKEA to get stuff for our new apartment. Like, you know what I mean? That's how hard it was. I was like, I don't even know how to do this. And she tells you in her story, I think, then what happened there. But effectively, she got to the point where she believed that Jesus was who he said he was, that the resurrection was real and logical, but she wasn't a Christian until the way back home in that journey in the car where we're singing Amazing Grace, and grace just kind of becomes real. The Holy Spirit reveals to her the awesomeness of that. So when she told me, hey, I've become a Christian, I thought that maybe she had found out that I was going to break up with her. And I was like, wait, what? Like, what's changed? tell me, why is it different from here to here? Of course I knew, but I was just so geared up for probably getting what I deserved in a sense. And what I got was probably something a little bit more akin to an Exodus moment in my Christian story, where I was like going, oh man, God has not only forgiven me for never giving him control or allowing the gospel to seep into this area of my life. Not only has he forgiven me for that, he's actually also given me everything that my heart has desired in a relationship in Cathra. And I still look back in that moment a bit like Israel looks back on Exodus, because I think it not only brought about the relationship that we have now, and it was actually also a very key defining moment in how I understood God's grace in my own life and what that really looked like. Like, it's not about my performance, but actually he is someone who is willing to forgive if we, as we come to him for repentance and have faith that he has forgiven us. And that has completely shaped the way that I live a lot of my life now, even though I still struggle with a bunch of things. So that's how Catherine and I then got together, and I went, well, hey, look, 99% of this was right. God, you fixed that main thing. It would be a bit dumb now if we kind of split up, right? So we got engaged then maybe about 6 months later, and then got married in 25th of August 2005 and left for Australia the next day, pretty much. Yeah.
Going on an Australian honeymoon that lasts for a very, very long time. Right?
Happy anniversary.
That's right. It was only last week.
Yeah.
Shh, don't tell people when we record this.
Oh, yeah.
That's fine. Wow.
It's live. It's always live.
Yeah, live, kind
Coming
of.
to you live.
Right now it's live. It's not coming to people live. Wow, so there's a lot going on there. And I should say that, like, we just recorded another podcast. There was a lot going on. So it's both our guests have been quite intrepid travelers. There's a lot of traveling going on. So you got married. You said that was 2005?
Yep.
Okay. So
how old were you when you got married?
I was 25. So I was born 1980. 80. 1980.
Yeah. How do you say it?
8. So it's 8, not 8.
8.
Yeah.
8. 88.
That's not bad. That's not bad for a first attempt.
88. Pretty good accents, man. The other one I can't get, though, is my wife's Latvian grandmother. I just can't get it.
I can't say I've ever tried a Latvian accent myself.
It's really hard. It's like Russian, but it's like got this different, like it's higher than Russian. It's really hard to do. And you just have to put IY at the end of everyone's name. They got, like, my wife's name's Karen. They got Kareni. Like, oh, who's that? Anyway, sorry.
No, that's intriguing. It's good.
Yeah. Where are we going with your podcast? Just to bring it back to me for a second. So you moved straight out to Australia?
Pretty much. We went travelling for 8 months.
Okay.
That's right.
How... You keep saying that's right, like, I remember every single thing about Catherine's podcast.
I listened very intently.
Well, that's a good thing.
I also happened to bump into Lee and Cathra on the train while I was listening.
Oh, really?
To the podcast. Yes.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. So you've got all these memories about her memories.
And we get to go to Bible study together.
Yes, this
is
true.
You?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right.
Wow, nice one. So you move out to Australia eventually. How did your family deal with that? Because I know we've heard about Catherine's, but what about your family?
Yeah. Well, was really hard. So remember I said to you before that leaving to go to university was a big thing. Leaving to go to Australia for a year and come back was also a big thing. And my mom was really excited about that. Like she always backed me, wanted me to do whatever, probably wanted me to succeed. She was very, very proud of the fact that I was the first person in our extended family to go to uni, all of that kind of stuff. She just wanted me to come back and finish. So I'd come back, finish that. I think it was interesting. One of the first things that my mum said was, did was bawl her eyes out. She started crying and she was like, I remember when you were 3, you said that you would go and live in Australia when you grew up, and I never thought that it would happen. And I'm like, oh, really? So apparently at the age of 3, I kind of thought that I was going to go and live in Australia. I don't remember that. But my mum did. And one of the other things was that at that point, none of my family were Christians. And I can remember praying a prayer that was, hey God, like I believe that this is where, like it wasn't, we didn't just want to come to Australia. I loved the surf, loved the culture, loved the sun, all of that kind of stuff. But that was not going to be enough for us to actually move to the other side of the world. We actually felt that God was calling us to come here. But anyway, I remember them praying, hey God, if we're going to go here, I need you to help me to trust you with my family. I know that I can trust you, but help me to trust you with my family. Like this is going to be really hard. It was that next layer of me not over-functioning and being there to fix my family. And what happened was at the airport, my sister Emma, who's 2 years younger than me, she came up to me at the airport and she just was bawling her eyes out. And I thought, okay, right, it's really hard, I know. But she said, Ollie, I think that God's talking to me. Now, previous to that, anytime that I mentioned Jesus, I was told to F away off. Sorry, Emma, but it's kind of true. And I took that as God saying to me, hey Lee, I've got you and I've got your family. So that was really, really, that was really, really difficult. But at the same time, I really felt that God was saying, I've got you. We felt that we had a purpose on moving out here. And in those earlier stages when we didn't have kids and whatever, when we were younger, we probably were a bit flippant about how hard that was for our family. But we had lots of people coming out. My mum came out a few times, all of that kind of stuff. And probably one of the best things, though, was I think with a bit of distance, it enabled us as my side of the family to work through a bunch of different things that were going on. And this is not everybody's story, but basically what happened was my sister and brother-in-law come out, pretty much, become Christians off the back of that. My mum comes out a year later, becomes a Christian in our living room, or at least recommits her life to Jesus. Don't know which one of those two is true, but it was a significant moment for her. So I got to kind of like lead mum in that. And, so I think that there have been lots of blessings off the back of that, but it's certainly been hard. It was hard on them not being around the kids. I miss my family deeply and dearly. Yeah. So, yeah.
That's cool.
So that's awesome.
That's really cool to, like, kind of get that answer to prayers. Like, oh yeah, your family's taken care of. Don't worry, because that's. I mean, it must have been a big weight off your shoulders because you said that's been a big thing for you growing up. Was that you need to be not in charge, in taking responsibility.
Yeah. And probably, I mean, like this is not necessarily fully where you're going, but I think some of this has really been at the front of my mind more recently, because my mum actually passed away in April last year, and we ended up being back for 6 months. It was unplanned. She was only 62 on her birthday, and so obviously you know, we had been in Australia 17 years. Here's a massive moment where that prayer that I pray to God back then about my family, all of that stuff kind of starts to come up again, and to go, right, okay, like what does this look like? What does it look like for God to have my family? And basically my mum ended up, she was one of the fittest people in our family, but got cancer that became inoperable and terminal. And we went back, and I can remember saying to my mum on her birthday, 21st of March, in that year, recalling this prayer that I had. And she was, by that stage, she had cancer riddled throughout her body. She had spontaneous fractures had happened in her spine, all of that kind of stuff. And she had been suffering a lot by this stage. And I said to her, hey, Mum, like, I know that you're scared right now. And I know that you're scared largely because you're scared to leave your family behind in terms of what might happen. But let me tell you a prayer that I prayed 18 years ago. And I told her that prayer that I prayed. And I said, hey, I can see how God has been faithful to that prayer the whole way along. And where he was saying to me, you can get onto the train and I've got you, or onto the plane and I've got you. I think what he's saying to you now in that is that I've got you. You can come home. I've got you. I've got your family. And she just looked at me and she said, does that mean I'm going to go tonight? I was like, I hope not, Mum. No. But what she said was, she said, I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to suffer anymore. But Jesus has suffered way more for me. So if I am to suffer more, I know that God will use that for good, and I will gladly do it effectively, is what she said. And over that period of time, she suffered a lot, but I got lots more gospel opportunities with my family. My other sister became a Christian. There were lots of people became Christians at our funeral. People became like it was just phenomenal. Wow. What happened in that moment. And I think that has really just brought me back full circle, where, you know, I could have been left going, hey God, what have you done? You haven't really, you know, looked after me, or regretting the 18 years that we've been in Australia, all of that. And we go, no, actually not. You know, like it is true, even with my mom dying and whatever, that God had got us and had got my family, and will continue to, because that's the hardest thing about living the other side of the world. You're always waiting for that phone call, or kind of wondering what's going to go wrong next. So it's been hard. There's been lots of practical things that have been hard, but at the same time, God has blessed us abundantly and actually allowed us to see many of the graces of the things that he has been doing under the surface, which not a lot of people get to see. And it's really hard, you know. At the same time, I want to be with my family right now, you know, but we still feel that this is where God has called us to at this moment, and this is where we are. So yeah. Difficult.
You got any questions, Amanda? I do, but I want to give you some opportunity as well.
Oh, I don't know. Like, I've got lots of questions.
Is there one out there?
My current questioning is more around your siblings and where they're all at the moment.
Yeah. So I've got 4 siblings. Yeah. And my sister Emma owns a coffee shop in Northern Ireland. It was voted Ireland's best coffee shop for a while. So if you ever go there, let me know and I'll hook you up. Yeah. And my sister Zoe is married with 2 kids. She lives in another part of Northern Ireland, and she's a beautiful mum, and works in a doctor's surgery, I think, something like that. And then Curtis, my brother, he lives in another part of Northern Ireland, and he works as like a sales consultant. And my youngest sister, Paige, who became a Christian when we were back in Ireland in our living room, which was awesome. She's just had her second baby, and is kind of doing all kind of things, mum things. And they're all still mourning mum, because she was a key, you know, they all saw her every day, you know, so it was really, really tough for them. So yeah, they're all kind of, that's what they're doing.
They're all close by to each other.
Yeah, most people in Northern Ireland live 5 minutes down the road from their mum, and then so they're maybe within about 20 minutes driving from each other, something like that. So, yeah.
That's cool. So when you come to Australia, were you planning to be a pastor? Pastor, minister, whatever you want to call it?
Not a chance.
Yeah.
No. No, definitely not. Like I couldn't have seen myself doing anything worse than that, actually, in a sense. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but I just like because of my experience with church growing up as a kid, and whatever, I was just like, and I can't see myself doing that. Was very serious, staid, and that's not me, right? But then the other thing was too, that I still saw that there was this huge gap between going overseas to do mission, which we need to do. Like, there are loads of unreached people groups still in the world that we need to get the gospel to, and we need to mobilize more and more people to do that. But I just kept on seeing this gap where people weren't going across the streets and they weren't working out how to do that. So we thought that we were going to come out here and be more cross-cultural missionaries, either to go to more like an indigenous part of Australia, or maybe to South America or somewhere like that. We just went, we'll set up base camp here. And one of the things that I'd started doing was working out how to maybe run an alternative youth venue. I'd forgotten about Soulies at this point, but that actually ran discipleship programs, and then that culminated in short-term mission trips, because that's what I had done back in Ireland, and I just saw how beneficial that was to spark local mission happening. But you know, we landed here. I needed to work I worked as a nurse. We had Josh a couple of years after that, and whatever. So it took a while before I even decided to go to Bible college or whatever. So we were serving in our local church. We were there all the time. And then in 2008, that's when Josh was born. I was playing football, like soccer, proper football, and I did
this podcast accepts football as the correct term.
That's good. Well, it is the correct term.
Yeah,
it's not
right.
accepts it as the correct term.
Yeah, sorry.
And,
should
acknowledges.
We've stated that football is the correct term, not soccer.
Yes. Yeah. And anyway, I did my knee just before Joshy was born, which was awesome, and then had surgery just after Josh was born, which was even more awesome, and then a little bit after that, I also ended up getting contact dermatitis. So I was working as an ICU and emergency, like that had been my background, ICU and emergency. So you were wearing gloves a lot.
Yeah.
I got contact dermatitis, had to pause doing work, and God used that to basically nudge me in the direction that I knew that I wanted to go in. So a guy at church tapped me in the shoulder and said, I reckon you'd be good at this. There was a job for a youth pastor, and I was like, yeah, I reckon so as well. I became a youth pastor with no training, and then very, very quickly went, oh my goodness, I need to know so much more. Hadn't grown up in a Christian home, you know, and didn't know much about the Bible. But I was passionate, and I loved Jesus, you know, and I loved young people, and I thought, I want to help young people the way that I needed to hear the gospel back then. So I found out that there was YouthWorks College down at Loftus. So I signed up for college, and I started YouthWorks College in 2009, and I basically did 3 years there whilst working as a youth and young adults pastor at Engadine Congregational Church just up the road, which is where my uncle was the pastor. And over that period of time, what happened for me was that God just started to shape a lot of this thinking, where I saw the gap. And through the principal there at the time, I remember chatting to him about Peter, when he said that he's talking, you know, about the church. He's saying, you are the royal priesthood who will declare the praises of my name. And I went, actually, the church is not only the bride of Christ. I had no idea that that's what the language was used even before, but that the church was the bride of Christ, but not only the bride of Christ, actually the primary vehicle for presenting and proclaiming Jesus to the people around us. So therefore, mission is not something that we do just out here. It's something that we do by virtue of who we are. And I was like, oh, flip. This is really awesome. Like actually, we should be doing this. And am I allowed to say flip? Is that like really bad?
That's fine.
It's acceptable in Northern Ireland to say that word. It's probably about the only one that you can say. Oh. Anyway, and at the same time, a guy who's now been kind of I don't want to say dethroned, but Mark Driscoll. A lot of people don't want to admit this anymore, but Mark Driscoll came out to Australia. And he started talking about this thing called church planting. And I wasn't young, restless, and hungry, I wasn't necessarily sitting in that camp. But what God used that for me in was going, now I can see how the experience that I've had, the love for mission and evangelism that God seems to have wired me with, how that can actually play part within a local church body. And it's this thing called church planting. And it was probably only at that moment that I really thought, oh yeah, I could be a pastor of a church, and I feel like I'm called to do that, not just that I could kind of do that. And that kind of set us on a bit of a trajectory in terms of what I did. So it wasn't until that moment that I'd already been working as a pastor in a church for a while that it really twigged on for me as to why this is actually so important to equip the saints for the work that has been set aside in advance for us to do, so that we can proclaim and present Jesus to the people around us. I couldn't have said it back then, but that's, yeah.
That was pretty cool. You do have a bit of a deadline to get out of here, so I think we might have to get you back for a part 2, because like you just mentioned church planning, but there's a whole realm of doing church planning and stuff like that to hear about from your story. Yeah. But I thought you did mention Josh, your son.
Yes.
Can you tell us about your family and what God has taught you about being a dad?
Yeah. So I'll first of all tell you, I've got my son Matthew back in Ireland.
Yes.
I've got a granddaughter. I became a grandfather at 38. So I've got a granddaughter, Gracie, who is 5. And then I've got Josh, Grace, Sophia, and Ava, 15, 13, 11, and 9. And so there's a lot of things that I've done wrong and a lot of things that I've learned. Here's probably the key thing, I reckon, is that no matter how good I might be at being a father, that ultimately I am not the Father.
Yes.
Father God. And that actually frees me up to sit with all of the moments that I suck, that I'm selfish, that I don't sacrifice for my kids and my family, and not write it off and go, it doesn't matter. It does matter, but actually be able to come to God and my family and whatever and say sorry. So I think there's just something profoundly freeing in knowing that we have our Father God, who is the one who is the ultimate father of my children, and that impacts the way that I approach all of my feelings, all of my fears, all of those kinds of things as well, in a deep and profound way. So it doesn't mean that I find it easy, but it's certainly, every time I kind of come up against where I've come up short, I go, hi, sorry, hi. God is, he is the one who is ultimately there, and it helps me to take responsibility. It helps me to engage with my fears and failures and whatever. So I think that's helpful, and an abundance of many other things. Can I say one more thing, actually?
Of course.
Maybe particularly to dads. This is about being a father. But like
men are just block your eyes.
The other thing is that often as dads, this is true for mums as well, not just for dads. Like I don't like making huge gender distinctions, right? But I reckon that it's really, really helpful for our kids to see us struggling, processing and crying, particularly our sons, because we live in a culture where that's not okay and that we need to have everything all together. So that whole idea of the gospel, of God as our Father, and whatever frees us up to not have to kind of feel like we need to always be in control of everything. And I think it's actually really, really helpful for us as dads to model and show that to our kids. It's hugely vulnerable. It's really, really hard. But I think that there's something uniquely helpful in that for our children, as they will then engage in all of the fears and failures and challenges of growing up as an adult and being a parent themselves.
I think you're right. I mean, the one thing that I shared on my particular episode where Amanda was guest hosting for the first time was that having children makes you take responsibility. But I think what you're saying there, or how I heard it, was if you aren't giving up control to God, then you're not taking responsibility in a sense.
Yeah.
And I think you're 100% right. And I think that I don't always model it to my children, but to be able to say I take responsibility, but because
yes,
I've got a father that actually takes ultimate responsibility for everything, right? And has through Jesus. Yeah. And you know what I mean? Look, we're all wired differently. Our family of origin stuff is all different, you know. So there are things that we all wrestle with at different ages and stages. So I'm not saying that unless you're doing that or have discovered that you're doing a bad job, but I think in my particular story that has been really, really freeing, and particularly as I walked through my mum dying, like there were moments where I could do nothing but just cry in my bed. Or I can remember driving with Josh once to go and see Mum, and it was just me and him in the car, and I am bawling my eyes out the whole way along, and he just looks at me, puts his hand on my leg, and he says nothing. And that was such a beautiful moment, you know, like just to sit with that and go, like, there is deep learning that happens in those moments for our children. Yes, I mean, like I'd love to be able to kind of see men who can do that and have courage to work out doing that, but I know that it's so difficult. Like I was brought up by my mum, you know, so I'm okay with crying, all of that kind of stuff. But I do think that as I watch the culture around me, and particularly of guys and whatever, we don't know how to take responsibility. We delay doing that. We struggle with engaging in weakness and not having answers, and all of those things just get compounded when you become a father. Absolutely. Right? And then all of your fears come out, and that's it's so hard. Hard, but again, like it's just like God keeps growing you, right? Yeah. We're going to do a part 2. Anything you'd like to ask Lee before we move on to let him go and bring him back again?
No, I think that's a good place to just leave it.
Yeah, cool.
I reckon so.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, man. Thanks for coming on, but we'll get you back pretty soon.
Does this mean that I'm shorter than Cathra because like part 1 is shorter?
Well, it depends. Because if we combine them.
my goal is just to be shorter than Cathra, because that never happens, and then I can never let her live it down for the rest of our lives.
That was never going to happen. Like.
Yeah. No, definitely not.
Well, to be continued.
Yes,
as we'll say. But it's been lovely so far.
Yeah,
we're looking forward to hearing more stories from the mouth of Murray.
From the mouth of Murray.
I had to finish an alliteration. Yes. Yeah.
But musings from the mouth of Murray.
Oh,
there we go.
So nice.
Multiple musings. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, just keep adding them.
Well done. Very Irish, Northern Irish of you.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sure not. But yeah, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much. We'll continue this. Might even be next week. We'll see how we go. But
yeah.
I've been doing a lot of podcasting this morning. We will have. I just read. Gosh, I'm all over the place at the moment. We will have Lee back. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for your time.
You're very welcome.
Thank you to everyone
Thanks,
listening. Thank you to
Lee.
Amanda being on.
Pleasure. Always
again.
a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
And we finish with a one-way. Do you know what a one-way is? I like it when we do.
Hey.
He knows.
I know what a one-way is from 2001.
Hey, OG one way.
There we go. Yeah, the original one-way. Yeah.
One way. Thank you very much. Goodbye and to be continued.